Having put on his shoes and a very thin cravat of muslin, and over it a stiff stock of black silk, very high and broad, and with a flap in front, Napoleon put on a round waistcoat of white kerseymere, a waistcoat coming lower down than the waistcoats of today. This waistcoat was reckoned with the knee breeches at 85 francs by the usual tailor Chevalier, at 64 francs by Lejeune, who in 1815 replaced Chevalier. The emperor changed his waistcoat and knee breeches every morning, only wearing them when clean and having them washed only 3 or 4 times. Careful as he was of his person, he was very little so of his clothes. He wiped his pen on his breeches, or he splashed the ink about by tossing his pen on his writing table. This did not make him change them during the day any more than his silk stockings, although he had the habit of rubbing one leg with the heel of the shoe of the other foot when it itched. The renewing of the waistcoats and knee breeches was a serious matter. 48 were to be supplied yearly, and they ought to have lasted 3 years, but there was always a deficiency. In 1815, on going through the wardrobe, there were only 74 instead of 144. The others must have been put aside. Over his waistcoat, he buckled on his sword belt. The shape of this belt changed at different times. The emperor tried a belt with buckles in the form of shields ornamented with eagles' heads, charged with the initial letter N, and each one furnished with an S hook in the form of a serpent. He had belts of purple silk, belts of black leather, belts of deerskin lined with gold. He even used light cross belts worn over his shirt and under his waistcoat, in which the sword was slipped into a simple loop of white leather. But in the general way, his sword belt, which he took off in his cabinet, was worn over or under the waistcoat. Napoleon had only 2 swords in constant use, both with gold hilts, with sheaths of tortoiseshell mounted in gold. On the hilt of one in the middle was represented an iron crown surmounted with a wreath of laurel, and on each side the heads of Minerva and Hercules in medallions enriched with arabesques. The pommel, terminated with a helmet, was formed of an owl. The bow, ornamented with eagles and bees, was finished off with a small antique lion's head. The guard, consisting of a reversed shell, was chased with a shield charged with an eagle grasping thunderbolts. On the edge of the shield were placed 16 bees, as many as there were cohorts in the Legion of Honor. The blade of cast steel was encrusted with ornament. Vionney supplied this sword, which cost 5,700 francs. One might be tempted to suppose that the emperor had more than 2 swords in general use, but only 2 are to be found in the different inventories. No doubt he had swords of ceremony, but a very small number. In 1811, he possessed in all 4 swords, the 2 in general use, a sword of French pattern of silver gilt, and a sword with straight blade and an ivory hilt, the sword which the emperor wore at Austerlitz, that which after that day he had almost constantly by his side, which he bequeathed to his son, and with General Berthier, who had charge of it, offered to King Louis Philippe, is preserved in the cellar of the tomb at Les Invalides. On the waistcoat, Napoleon wore the Grand Cordon of the Legion of Honor. It was only on occasions of state that he wore it upon his coat. Finally, the emperor was handed his coat, generally the coat of the chasseur cheval of his guard. On Sundays and for ceremonies, when he did not put on state dress, the coat of the foot grenadiers. The grenadier's coat was of royal blue cloth, the collar blue without piping, the lapels white, cut square without piping, the cuffs scarlet without piping, the flaps white with 3 points, the lining scarlet without piping, turned back, caught up and decorated with 4 grenades embroidered with gold on white cloth, the cut of the pocket long ways, marked by an edging of scarlet, the gilt buttons bore an eagle crown. The coat of the chasseur cheval was of green cloth, lapels pointed, lining of the same cloth, collars and cuffs pointed red, gussets in the folds green, piped with red, facing ornamented with hunting horns embroidered in gold, hussar buttons, bearing an eagle crown. Certain coats, among others, the one at the museum at Sens, have the buttons round and plain.